I'll just talk for a couple of minutes about what it's been like the first couple of months, but we want to leave more time for questions because I think that'll be more interesting for everybody. So I think what I'll delve into for a minute is just the committee assignments that I'm on. I'm on Budget Committee and Homeland Security. Those are two places I like to be. They're obviously not A committees. I am a freshman. The way this works, just so everyone understands how you get a committee assignments, that is chosen by your party. So the Republican leadership has a steering committee. They take votes on where to place everybody on committees, and that's based on experience, seniority. It's based on what you ask for. I actually did ask for Homeland Security and Budget Committee. One, because they're realistic committees that I can actually get on. If you ask for Ways and Means right away, it doesn't matter how good of friends I am with Kevin Brady, it's just not going to happen. But put in a good word for me, please. His sister's right here. But that is where I want to end up eventually, actually. So, and the reason I want to end up there is has to do with my work on the Budget Committee. What we argue about on Budget Committee mostly is, well, it's the budget, but it's those bigger top line items, like what is causing debt? I mean, that's actually a really fundamental question that we fight about on the Budget Committee. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle would claim that the tax cuts pretty much are responsible for deficits and the debt. Okay, we would argue that's not true. We would argue that entitlement spending is completely responsible for driving the debt, because it's 70% of our entire federal budget goes to entitlement programs. By those I mean Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt, and other welfare programs. And they're mandatory spending because we don't vote on them every year. And that's a real problem. Because we have these real big fights about discretionary spending. That's another thing we'll be working on in Budget Committee is what these spending caps will look like. So because of the Budget Control Act in 2011, there are caps put on discretionary spending limits, and those get pretty much raised every single time that there's a bipartisan budget act. And that fight is usually between those who want to keep defense spending up and usually Democrats who say, okay, fine, we'll raise that, but then you also have to raise the non-defense discretionary side. By non-defense discretionary side, I mean all of federal agencies. Okay, so, federal agencies that do matter to us. So it's a reasonable conversation to have on how much we want to raise those caps. Right now, the president's budget has come out, and it doesn't raise any of the caps. Okay, it funds the defense budget basically by using what is a little bit of a budget gimmick, loophole, which is called overseas contingency funding. So that isn't subject to budget caps. I'm getting really detailed here, but this is the kind of thing we work on in Budget Committee, as well as the bigger questions of what causes the debt. And on Homeland Security Committee, this one hits a little closer to home, of course, because what we work on there are border security issues and issues related to disaster relief and FEMA. So I'm on the two subcommittees I am on there are the Oversight Committee. I've actually got a pretty great working relationship with my Democrat colleague. She's also a freshman. She's from New Mexico. And she's the chairwoman. I'm the ranking member on that subcommittee. What we've been working on recently is ways to improve Customs and Border Patrol hiring. So we've actually both pushed legislation. Hers is more focused on hiring in the rural areas. Mine is focused on making the actual hiring process more efficient by getting rid of, or at least limiting the use of polygraphs to get into Border Patrol. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that we could get into if you'd like. The next thing we'd like to work on together is how to streamline FEMA funding, or more importantly, disaster relief funding, so that it mainly is driven through FEMA as opposed to the many, many other agencies that it currently goes through, which means you have to fill out quite a few different applications in order to get some of the funding that you need. Ask about anything today. Ask about other legislation that's gone through. There's been some big ones that are quite contentious, but I'm not so sure how much the public really knows about these. So whether it's H.R. 1 or H.R. 8 or some other up-and-coming legislation that's going to be coming through the House, and you can ask about anything you want. So with that, I think we have some planned questions, and I'll let the moderators take it. Thank you for having me.
We want to talk about small businesses recovering from Harvey. So following Harvey, in the Lake Houston area, the SBA identified more than 16,000 homes that were damaged and more than 3,300 businesses. So that's 44% of our businesses that were damaged. According to FEMA, 40% of small businesses won't reopen following a disaster, yet there's no federal aid available to businesses other than SBA loans, which require businesses to take on more debt. Residents can apply for FEMA funds, but businesses don't have FEMA as an option. Of nearly the $1.4 billion approved, only about 10% were actually for business loans. And of course, we know that business recovery is vital for communities to recover. So how can the federal government play a greater role in helping businesses recover?
Yeah, this goes into something we wanted to work on, which is, okay, how does disaster relief spent? How many agencies do you really have to go through? Why should you go through all those agencies in order to get that relief? What you're getting at, though, is why can't FEMA money be used for small businesses? I think it can, actually, to a degree, but obviously not enough, because if people aren't getting it. The first thing I would encourage is for small businesses to contact our office. Yeah, we can't have situations where our businesses can't recover. I mean, that's a fundamental aspect of recovery, and it needs to be holistic. So
we're all anxiously awaiting response to the expansion of emergency dredging that will address the removal of the mouth bar created in Lake Houston. Are there any new developments on the approval process or timing of decisions, given we are a little more than 2 months away from the next hurricane season?
We talked to the Army Corps of Engineers about this a couple months ago. Turned out the City of Houston had not actually submitted the application yet, and they still have not. That's a real problem. So the City of Houston needs to submit the application. We're trying to dredge the mouth bar, and the reason, just so everybody understands, the reason we're trying to dredge this mouth bar now is so that we can use the equipment that's already there and save money in the long run and get it done faster. But the City of Houston needs to give the Army Corps of Engineers a proper application so that the Army Corps of Engineers can then expedite it. That's what needs to happen. We're working closely with City of Houston on this, and Steve Costello in particular. And they assured us, I think, that they'll have that application in hopefully this week, but we've heard that last week and the week before that and the week before that and the week before that. You know, I can put a lot of pressure on the Army Corps of Engineers, but they have to have something in front of them. So call your city council. Get that done, because we absolutely need it done. Hurricane season's coming up again soon, and again, we need to get this application done by April, I believe. And I think the Army will work with us on this, but they've got to have something in front of them. You know, everybody's got their own role. First, where it mainly needs to happen, of course, is at the local level. But the federal role is bigger infrastructure projects, and I do think that there's probably a lot of room for working together between Democrats and Republicans on infrastructure projects. Whether that's Houston Ship Channel, and of course, whether it's the many Army Corps of Engineers projects that we have on the books that we'd like to get done. It's never going to happen as fast as people would like it to. There are various studies that have to take place. We're doing a regional study right now in conjunct that is led by the Harris County Flood Control District. In the end, I think they're the ones who really should have the lead on how Harris County adapts to future flooding and mitigation. I think they're doing a pretty good job. I think they've got the experts on hand, and I think they just really care about what they're doing. And I think that's important. And from the federal side, it's important to make sure they have the resources they need, that when we do run into situations where we're getting caught up in a permitting process, that we expedite that as much as possible and get it done. But we meet regularly with the Army Corps of Engineers on these projects, so that, because the most important thing for a business when they're thinking about investment is predictability. And you need to be able to predict that when storms come, that there is infrastructure in place to properly mitigate the damage in a very flood-prone region like we live in. So it's going to be those big infrastructure projects that we'll continue to look at.
Given that our area is literally a bathtub drain for the San Jacinto watershed with a constant flow of sand and debris flowing downstream, what are your thoughts in terms of long-term mitigation and resiliency for our area when it comes to dredging maintenance, and how to fund, given that there's no single governmental agency that has responsibility for the channels.
I think we're more than a bathtub, you know? It's a very nice bathtub. Very nice. So specifically for the Lake Houston region, I think there's some broad agreement on what sort of needs to happen. The question of funding, it's always going to be a mix. You know, I think Houston did the right thing by voting on a $2.5 billion flood bond. And, you know, there will be some federal matching dollars that come with that. A lot of it is already there. It just, the weighting is mostly because of the engineers still need to do the studies required to actually make sure that we're making the right investments. I mean, these are generally 80-year investments. And again, it's just never going to be fast enough for people. And I get that. I wish it could go faster. I wish we thought about this 10 years ago, you know, but unfortunately our leadership did not. And now we're paying for it a little bit. But for Lake Houston in particular, I would say there's some broad agreement on what needs to happen. It's dredging, it's more detention capabilities, especially upstream, you know, and that's working with Montgomery County, of course. It's looking at gates in the southern end of Lake Houston so that we can drain it as needed, and then it's looking for more creative ways to fund it. Maybe that's funding it through the fact that City of Houston uses it as a water supply. Maybe you fund it through fees on that. Maybe you actually get the City of Houston to use the drainage fees like they're supposed to for flood mitigation projects, and then the federal side of that, of course, is something that I'll look at, and what kind of federal dollars would be used to match these projects. So, because again, like you said, we are the final point of this entire floodplain, and I think that needs to be recognized, and you know, we need to make our voices heard up in this area. And I think a lot of people rightfully feel like oftentimes we're forgotten, and we can't let that happen.
So we're going to switch gears and talk border security for a second. So the border wall has been a hot topic so far this year, with the debate leading to the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. Do you feel the border wall will happen? And if so, will it affect federal flood recovery dollars?
Well, I'll answer that last question first. It won't affect flood recovery dollars. We won't let it. We made that very clear as a delegation as this conversation was happening before the president declared a national emergency. Will the border wall happen? It depends on what you mean by border wall. So there will be some border wall that happens. So the spending deal that we ended up, well, we didn't agree on it, I would say, but we ended up passing was about $1.3 billion for border funding, border wall funding, which ends up being about 50 miles of border wall, specifically in the Rio Grande Valley. So I'm glad it's going to the Rio Grande Valley. Rio Grande Valley is responsible for about 40% of all illegal crossings in the nation. So there's huge amount of inflows there. I was down there a few weeks ago, and there was one night, and this has now become the norm actually, about 1,000 people a day just crossing over. And there's multiple problems with it. One, it's a lack of infrastructure. The Border Patrol is stretched very thin. It's very obvious that they need some kind of physical barriers there. And going down there too, you learn a little bit more about what that looks like in Texas. You know, in Arizona, New Mexico, California, it's pretty simple. That's a big, giant, flat area. Just put a wall there. I mean, it's really that simple. We do have a Rio Grande River in Texas, and it makes it a little bit more complicated, but not that complicated. There are issues with land use and the issue of using eminent domain to take that land, but there's a lot of ranchers who would be happy to just let the federal government build on their land. And the reality is you can put that wall or fence or whatever, we'll call it steel bollard fencing because that's really what we're talking about. You can put that, a certain distance from the river, still have perfect access to the river via gates and things that they install on there. That's what it looks like on the eastern side of the Rio Grande Valley, around Brownsville, where they have about 35 miles of fencing, and things work just fine. There's no issues with accessing the river, and as a result of that infrastructure on the eastern corridor of Rio Grande Valley, where Brownsville is, they have hardly any crossings. So if there's 1,000 crossings a day, which isn't even accurate, that was 1,000 crossings in just one tiny part. Well, let's say there's 1,000 a day in the Rio Grande Valley sector. Only 6% of those happen in Brownsville. Why? Because they have the right resources they need. Closer to McAllen area, they have hardly any resources at all, and they're just running around chasing people down all the time, or they're dealing with 50 migrants at a time who just turn themselves in. So this gets to a bigger problem, and this is why this is a very holistic problem. It's not just walls that we need, it's changes to the way we do asylum processing. So these people are turning themselves in because they have a kid with them. And if they have a kid with them, that's a ticket into the United States. That's a real problem because it has created this magnet and this draw our laws have that encourage people to take kids with them. This encourages human trafficking. A lot of these kids are recycled over and over again. And just one day I was there, they found 16 kids who were with adults who were not their parents. And why does this happen? Because our laws say, okay, if you claim asylum, we have to process you. If you have a kid with you, we'll definitely let you stay. Okay, so this has become a ticket for these people, and it's a completely unsustainable system. All we have to do to fix it is first make it illegal to claim asylum in between ports of entry. There's no good reason you have to do that. There is nobody literally running across the border, being chased down by government prosecution, which is the whole point of asylum. That doesn't exist. That doesn't happen. The reality is our borders on the southern side are completely controlled by the drug cartels. Nobody crosses that without paying the good drug cartels first. And if they let anybody cross, that would be bad for their business. So that's a fact that everybody needs to understand. There's no reason why people shouldn't be going to points of entry to claim asylum if they have a legitimate asylum claim. And what Democrats would say is that we don't have enough resources at those points of entry. And I would say, yeah, they're right. I would be willing to put more resources at those points of entry so that we can actually detain people and process them in the right manner, in an expedited manner, because right now there's about 800,000 people in the backlogs for asylum claims, which means they get to bus tickets anywhere they want, and then they can show up, years down the road for their asylum claim, which is not a very good system. It's creating an entirely new generation of dreamers, and we're just creating more and more problems on the top of the last ones that we still haven't solved yet.
Congressman, Erica had all the tough questions for you, and I've got the easy questions for you. But first, before I ask Congressman the next question, I want to thank Jenna, and thank you for your partnership. Thank you for everything you do for the business community here in this area, and we depend on you. Without our state and local partners, the U.S. Chamber could not be as effective as we are. So, Jenna, thank you so much. Congressman, I've got an idea for you to get on the Ways and Means Committee. Kevin Brady is a huge advocate of trade. 11 million jobs are responsible, our trade with Mexico and Canada, that's NAFTA, is responsible for 11 million jobs nationally and almost 1 million jobs just here in Texas alone. So NAFTA 2.0 or USMCA is a big issue for the U.S. Chamber and our trading partners, Mexico and Canada. I just want to tee that up to you and thank you again for being here, and it's an honor to be with you on stage. And talk about trade, talk about your support of trade, and I'm sure his sister will mention how supportive you are of trade, and then when Ways and Means spots come up next year, but he's a huge advocate. We depend on him a lot, and we want to talk about what you can do to help and how important trade is to your district here.
Of course. I mean, Texas is one of the #1 exporters in America, so the USMCA is important for us to pass. It's not quite clear what opposition there will be to it yet. I think there will be some. So the opposition will look like this. I'm not so sure there'll be big opposition on the Republican side, but on the Democrat side, the opposition will be regarding environmental laws and labor laws, even though the USMCA is a very obvious improvement along those lines on the previous NAFTA. So I'm not sure what their arguments will be, but we'll fight back against that. We would like to see this passed and approved as soon as possible. We haven't seen any issues come up with the agreement just yet. So, but unfortunately, I don't control the House. So on trade more generally, I think the president knows that, especially from delegations like Texas, that we're uncomfortable with starting trade wars. Because Texas competes pretty well, and we do well in a competitive environment, in a free environment with free trade. We're not looking for government protection. We're looking more for government to stay out of the way and give us some predictability, and we can plan accordingly. And that's what we'd like to see. When it comes to China, that's a little bit more nuanced, right? Because China is a bad actor. They're an unfair actor. They don't play on the world stage in good faith at all. The degree to which they steal intellectual property is just unbelievable. It's unprecedented, and they need to be punished for that. There are a lot of ways to punish a country for bad trade practices, though, and I'm not always so sure that tariffs are the way to do it. It's a very blunt force object, and the president knows how we feel about that, and we're hoping that wraps up eventually. And would certainly like to see us wrap up the steel and aluminum tariffs, with Canada, Mexico, and others. That's not helpful at all. So I'm not supportive of those. I'm more supportive and more understanding of our need to take the fight to the Chinese, because that is a long-term battle. The Chinese are fighting a Cold War with us right now. It's an economic Cold War, and it will eventually turn into a military Cold War. But they're a very patient bunch. And we should be very wary of their intentions. They state their intentions rather clearly, actually. Made in China 2025 is a way to completely take over the world. At least the Asian economy by that time, and then the world economy. They are able to invest and use the power of their state in ways that we cannot. And they do not respect a liberal global order, and we have to recognize that. But I think there are ways we can recognize that and fight back without hurting our own businesses as well.
Well, we really appreciate that, and we do need as many champions so in order to pass USMCA. And I know former Chairman Brady is going to be leading that charge, so we're looking forward to working with him and the rest of the Texas delegation on getting that passed.
So prior to Hurricane Harvey, when we surveyed our businesses, healthcare was always a top priority and a top concern. So businesses are telling us that providing insurance for their employees is crippling their ability to hire and to stay competitive. So what are your solutions for fixing this problem for our businesses?
Well, what we're really talking about there is a mandate. Okay, we were able to repeal the individual mandate, but not the mandate on small businesses, which is, as you said, difficult for people to deal with. It does reduce hiring, or you have to reduce workers' hours. It's not good for anybody. So freeing up the entire healthcare system is the goal. There's a fight in Congress right now. It's been an ongoing fight for quite a long time. More government or less government in it. Okay, we would say obviously you need less government. It's not no government. Healthcare, in the end, is a luxury good that you want as many people as possible to have access to, which means it can't be completely left to the free market. So we get that. But there's probably a lot better ways to do it, and experimentation at local levels, allowing businesses to come together and, in a communal sense, and to buy insurance in that way, I think would be a much preferable solution to what we have now. But what I worry about is seeing the tendency of Democrats now to go even further with more and more government control over this. Obamacare did that. That was the first step to more government control, and it had pretty bad consequences, because the more you try to regulate, the more you try to force even an insurance plan to cover things that people don't want covered. They have less choice, and their premiums go up. The reason they did that was essentially to protect people with pre-existing conditions, which I think is a laudable goal, but there's probably better ways to protect people with pre-existing conditions. I would like to see them removed from the individual insurance market altogether, put it in their own risk pool, and let the states manage that, which was the solution that was already happening and being formulated before Obamacare actually came into being, and then that shut the door on any of those innovations in the healthcare market, which is a problem. So The answer is to let businesses do what they want to do and improve our individual markets so that employees can actually buy the insurance they want that works for them, and also have it be portable, right? Because we want solutions that are private and portable, transparent pricing. That would go a long way, and not put the entire burden on small businesses, or at least give you the opportunity to band together and again in a community sense and buy insurance that way.
There's no issue, I think, that unites chambers as much as transportation and infrastructure. U.S. Chamber has been talking about a major, significant transportation bill for a number of years, and then President Trump has talked about a $1.2 or so trillion bill. I know that the committee is working through that. The issue is the pay-fors. And how do we pay for a $1.2 trillion transportation bill? The Chamber's asked for an increase of the gas tax. It hasn't been raised since 1993. I don't recall the U.S. Chamber ever being supportive of any tax, but this is a user fee, that what we like to say, and it's the easiest, most efficient way to get the money that we need to support a national transportation and infrastructure plan that's not just roads and bridges, but we're talking about pipelines, inland waterways, our electrical grid, water treatment facilities. So talk about what you're hearing and what you think the committee might end up doing, and on getting to a big next 5-6 year bill here hopefully this year.
I already hit on this, so I won't spend too much more time on it. It hasn't been talked about a lot. I'm not on transportation infrastructure, so that doesn't mean everybody's not generally supportive of it. I've already talked about what the kind of infrastructure projects I think we would need here. You've actually just mentioned most of them. Working with TxDOT on exactly what that's going to look like. Texas is the only donor state as far as the highway fund goes, which is problematic for us. It's not fair. And so the answer is I want to see other states actually fronting the bill on some of these things. Whether we raise the tax or not that's a whole other question. It tends to be very unpopular, and we'll see how that goes. But I think there is widespread support for an investment in infrastructure, because it is an investment, and in the end, whether it be 1.2 trillion, I think we've gotten away from that number. I don't think it would be quite that. Maybe over 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Which I think would make sense, but right now the way Congress works, especially when it flips power, is that the party that has taken power, the Democrats, they're going to have messaging bills for the next 6 months to a year. Okay, so they're putting forth bills that only speak to their base. These bills have no chance of ever making it through the Senate. They don't ask for our input. It's none of that, right? They took power. They're going to put messaging bills out, and so it's going to be gun control. It's going to be changing our election systems, Green New Deals. I mean, it's things like that. Unfortunately, it's not things like an infrastructure bill that they know will work with them on. That'll come, but unfortunately, it'll come later. We don't control the House or what goes on the floor.
You have some staff here. Would you introduce them and let us know how to get a hold of your office?
Absolutely. Sue Walden's our district director. He's right there. And Karen Cambio is right there. And especially with flooding issues, we're really blessed to have Karen. She's also on the San Jacinto River Authority Board, and just a huge advocate for flood mitigation in the Kingwood area. So what's the best way for everybody to get a hold of us? Call. Yeah, you can go if you go to our website, you can reach our office pretty easily in the district.
Thank you. I know a lot more questions, but the good thing is you can call the office and ask all the questions you want at your leisure. So let's give a big round of applause for our moderators, John, Erica. Thank you for being here, and Congressman Dan Crenshaw. Give him a big round of applause. We are going to wrap up the day. Thanks for being here. And we're going to take a picture. And you are now dismissed. Thanks so much.